Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another Mythgard Movie Club, A Wrinkle in Time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, so here we are. So first off, to start with a few announcements as soon as I get my mouse on the right screen. As we do, we just wanted to remind you of some things that are coming up here at Mythgard and our sort of parent institution, Signum University. The first is our upcoming moots, or our meetups. We've got London Moot coming up in just about a month here in April. Should be a good time. First event that we've held officially in England, and looking forward to it. I think we've got a good crowd coming. I know the CFP just ended for that, and I think there's a lot of good interest there. And then, of course, in June we have the main moot, the Myth Moot event that we've been holding now, number 5, annually or almost annually, I guess, not quite every year. It has been, but this year's theme of Fantastic Frontiers, that is still open for registration. So you can go out to our signumuniversity.org/events and see that and some of our other upcoming things and register for that. On Wednesday evenings, right now, currently running, although this is the second time that this has happened, it didn't actually occur this week. And if I recall, last time we had a movie club, it also did not occur that week, totally unrelated. It's not anything to do, but typically on Wednesdays at 10 p.m. we have our War of the Ring class where Dr. Corey, the Tolkien Professor Olson, is going through that volume of the History of Middle-earth series, and of course those books change out from time to time. Once he I don't know, once he's just kind of tired of doing one, I guess. No, when he gets to the end, then he'll move on to the next book. And you can vote for those, actually, if you donate to the university and get a say in what those next books will be. And then coming up, we've got already open for registration our summer classes for Signum University. We've got 3 really great classes coming up. Old Norse, Introduction to Old Norse, which is popular and may even be a little more popular this summer as well, because we've got an Eddic poetry class coming up in the fall. So if you kind of missed the Intro to Old Norse last time around, you'll want to take advantage of that to prepare for that class in the fall. And then Story of the Hobbit, which is, again, Dr. Olson talking through his research and his discussion about The Hobbit, somewhat, I think, based on the book that he wrote several years back now, but also a lot of original information in there. And then, of course, my favorite of the list here is the Science Fiction Part 1, which is just a really great survey of everything from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein all the way up through Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Just covers a lot of science fiction ground. So if you've not read a lot of the stories there, it's a great time to catch up and maybe fill in some of the gaps. And even if you have, it's maybe a good time to revisit some old favorite science fiction stories. There's a lot of information, not just even in what's actually read for the class, but in Dr. Sturgis's note. She gives you, I think coming out of the class, you have like a reading list that's about 5 times longer than going into it. So some good stuff there. And then we've got our, also coming up this summer, our Signum Academy, which last year we did a camp for middle school age children. Middle-aged children would be a different thing. Middle school age children on The Hobbit. And this year we're expanding that to 4 different books, including, again, The Hobbit, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and, of course, of particular interest tonight for a couple reasons, A Wrinkle in Time. Obviously, we're talking about the movie tonight, but also leading that Signum Academy class this summer is our very own Sparrow Alden, who, Sparrow, what can you tell us about what to expect for our summer camp on Wrinkle in Time?
What to expect at the summer camps is they are absolutely free to a library group, a homeschooling group, or even a family. They're directed to about 5th through 8th graders. And for 2 weeks, for each of the books, a different set of 2 weeks, every day there's a 1-hour lecture in exactly this format, in this GoToWebinar format. And the participating groups will have PDF packets of activities. For example, one of the interesting questions in A Wrinkle in Time is, what is science? How does that inform the way that Meg thinks? And so I've got some real world experiments for kids to do right there, no cost, but think like a scientist and have that be part of how you understand Meg's perspective on the world. That's the kind of thing we're doing, close observation, some journaling for activities for kids who like words, activities for kids who want to explore their feelings, and some hands-on stuff for people who learn kinesthetically like I do. It's going to be a lot of fun. Again, it's for any group, library, maybe a bookstore would want to do it, a homeschooling group, or a family. Click on the link, signumuniversity.org/academy/, and you'll have all the information you need to get registered to participate.
And just like people can watch our videos here asynchronously, they can participate in the program asynchronously if they cannot attend the live sessions.
That absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Sharon. If the family doesn't get together until supper time, the recording should be up by then, and that could be your evening family activity.
Very cool.
Or you can do like I'm planning and just pose as a 7th grader so you can sneak into one of these classes.
The only scenario in which that's acceptable, but we'll allow it.
I was just going to move to the next slide. But, Kay, you're probably, you can get away with posing as a 7th grader a lot easier than I.
The pigtails and then,
yeah, I can't do the pigtail thing, so that's probably it.
you know.
Oh, Curtis.
Oh, all right. Well, moving on. On that note, our next movie clubs that are in the docket, wanted to let you guys know that on May 3rd, probably around this time, but specific time to be confirmed, we're going to talk about Alien, the Ridley Scott classic. If you guys haven't seen Alien, you need to go see it right now. It's going to be a good time. So we're going to have another panel talking about that. And then on June 14th, we'll be talking about the next Star Wars movie, Solo. And we'll be kind of trying to get the band back together a little bit and have some of the Star Wars folks that we've had from previous panels, so that, hopefully so we can have this ongoing conversation about this new sort of wave of Star Wars movies that we're getting. So those are coming up over the next couple months. So before we actually start with getting into the movie, one last preamble was we do want to say just a couple sentences about who we all are, for those of you who may not know us. So I guess I'm the only one without their name on their picture, so I'll start. I'm Kat, and I'm one of the ones who hosts and runs these movie clubs. I'm a Signum alum as of last year, and I also continue to work on staff there as the academic coordinator. So if any of you have taken or plan to take Signum classes, you will probably exchange a few emails with me at some point. And I actually wanted to mention that this is a 100% Signum staff panel. We do have, Sparrow is also in the faculty, and, some of us have been students, but we are all on the staff as well. So I'm pretty proud of this panel that we have.
Yeah, I'll go next. So I'm Curtis. I sort of also run these movie clubs, and actually Kat failed to mention our podcast, so I'll mention that. We have a podcast together, Kat and Kurt's TV Review, where we talk about television shows like Buffy and Doctor Who and Battlestar Galactica. And as Kat mentioned, I am also a staff member at Signum University doing some of the marketing and helping out with the website a little bit. And I also am an alum, having finished up my thesis last year as well. So yeah, so that's me.
I'll go next. Okay, I'm Sharon Hoff, and I wear a number of hats at Signum University. If anyone tries to or needs to connect with Signum, you'll likely come across my path. I have a delightful title of Doorward, which is from Tolkien. So I just sort of welcome everybody, point them in the direction they need to go, and kind of that's where I'm at. And I was delighted to jump on the bandwagon for this movie club episode because Wrinkle in Time was a very pivotal, very important book in my youth. And so I just wanted to participate, and I'm very happy to be here.
I'll go next. So my name is Kay ben-Avraham. I also work on staff with Signum, organizing the Signum Symposia series. And I'm a freelance writer and editor at forwantofannail.net. You get bonus points if you can figure out the reference. And there's a 10-year-old version of me still walking through a Hawaiian airport carrying a very battered copy of A Wrinkle in Time under my arm. And Madeline's impact on me, I think, has been, as Sharon said, just incalculable. And this book in particular was sort of my entrance into her mind and her imagination. So I'm really thrilled to get to join everyone and talk about the movie.
Fantastic. I'm Sparrow, and I'm a precepting professor at Signum, and I also work for Kat, so that's fun, and with Sharon. But tonight I am particularly proud to be an adjunct professor at River Valley Community College here in Claremont, New Hampshire. And if you can see your list of attendees, there's the RVCC Kids Lit class. They're right next door to me so that we don't have strange feedback. And also about half the class has signed in from home. I said you can stay home and wear your pajamas today if you want to. Click the links. And so thank you everyone at home for signing in as well. So I'm so excited to have like my worlds collide and have my bricks and mortar classroom meet my friends from Mythgard and Signum. So thank you, Kat and Kurt, for making this possible.
Sure thing. And just real quick, for those of you who are attending, first, there is, you should be able to see a little questions box that you can submit questions to us and or comments and topics. We might not be able to, respond to every single one, but we'll do our best to, either through our normal discussion or bringing up some of the things that you guys point out as well. Make sure we try to cover as much as we possibly can in the time allotted. So, all right.
And I'm knitting at the same time. That's why I keep looking down from my camera
I noticed
instead
that.
of at the rest in a friendly manner.
And I mean, I have to say that it would be odd to not see you knitting. So I think this puts us all in, and we can have a nice homey discussion with you doing that.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, that seems particularly appropriate for this panel. So would have expected nothing less, Sparrow.
Thank you.
So we wanted to kind of start, or I wanted to start, I guess kind of very generally and very vaguely, and then we can go into things in more, however much specificity that we want. With this question of expectations. we can't escape the fact that all of us here have read the novel A Wrinkle in Time, either many moons ago or very recently, and you know, maybe a few times in between. So we're coming to it with different backgrounds, but we all have some relationship to the source material. And then we're going into this movie where you can't help but think of the novel as you watch it. And on the other hand, this is a movie club, and we try to make some effort towards discussing the movies and as you know, part of their own medium and their own genre, and not just how do they stack up against, you know, the novel that they're based on. So I kind of want to throw it out to people to say kind of what were your expectations and how do we even quantify or define those expectations. The quote I put is from an interview with Madeleine L'Engle talking about not this film, but the first film, which was a TV movie made in 2003, where she was asked if it met expectations, and she said, "Oh yes, I expected it to be bad, and it is." So that, by her terms, that is meeting expectations, although they were low ones. How do we define meeting expectations, and maybe generally, like, what were those expectations? What, you know, did this film, you know, meet them, not live up to them, surpass them? Did it subvert them in some way? So I'm just going to throw it out to whoever wants to grab that.
Okay, well, there you go. You know Kay's answer.
No, actually, I for anyone who follows some of Corey Olsen's materials, he'll often talk about how he doesn't enjoy disliking things and critiquing things in that sense. And I of a similar temperament. I usually go into a movie-going experience with the propensity to be pleased and delighted. And this movie absolutely delivered. I thought, like, just visually it was perfect. I loved the landscapes. I loved the inside of the home. I loved the way that they began it with this tiny image of an unfolding and folding little paper game, and that the way that tied into the then much more grandiose vision of tessering and this sort of like ripple effect in the surroundings. And I loved the characters. I loved how they were played. I thought it was just a delightful adventure. And that was kind of what I left the theater with. It's just sort of giddy with delight.
Well, I would say.
I have to.
Oh, go ahead, Sparrow.
I was going to agree with Kay because I expected visual gorgeousness.
Mm-hmm.
I expected that I wanted the big screen. And
Mm-hmm.
boy, did I want the big screen. I expected to be reminded of that book that I read to shreds when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 20, 25, you know. I expected to be reminded of it, but not have it completely recapitulated.
Mm-hmm.
But I expected and was thrilled to love Meg and to finally see Meg from the outside as an adult, be able to look at her. And that experience of looking at Meg from the outside instead of feeling, wow, I identify with this character, saying, oh, I can look at her now. And that experience was fabulous. And Kay, like you, I am the best audience in the world. Like I go to magic shows and you say, look at the birdie over here while you're picking my pocket. I'm looking at the birdie over there. So that was a lot of fun.
It's a good way to live.
Sharon, what were you thinking?
Well,
And I
I'm
dropped my
going
drink.
to just agree that my hope when I went to the film. I was hoping to be pleased, and I do admit did I did go with sort of a criteria, um, just of some very specific things that I was hoping to see, that I hoped that they would deliver on, that I felt would be an honorable and reasonable adaptation. And so most of those things were ticked. I'm not quite as easy to please as you. There are some concerns I have just with the overall production value or choices they made for the film. Not necessarily was it like the book, but just the film. So I have some concerns there, and maybe we'll discuss those later. But the some of the key things that I was looking for were ticked, and so I actually came away much much happier with the film than I anticipated, because I admit I read some of the reviews before going in. You know, a lot of the confusion that some people experienced, criticisms that people offered up. So when I actually went and saw the film, I was pleasantly surprised, and
Mm.
it was it was a good experience. But again, you know, I'm not quite as easy to please as you gals.
I'm somewhat similar in that I do tend to, not religiously, but I do tend to be a review reader, especially if it's something that I'm particularly excited for. Um, Sometimes have to kind of consciously decide not to do that, just to kind of go into something fresh. But I had a vague sense of mixed reviews, let's say. So that certainly tempered some of the pure excitement that I had. And so I think that maybe helped me to be a bit pleasantly surprised that we can talk about the quibbles and the nits we want to pick, but overall, it was the spirit of it, I thought, was much closer to the source and more what I was sort of expecting than I might have feared leading up to the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did anybody? Well, Curtis, probably be the only person who hadn't read the book. Did you read the book first, or did you see the film first?
I read the book like the day before I went to see the film.
Okay.
So as far as yeah, like I mean, as far as that goes, like I certainly didn't have like years of deep-seated preconceptions about
Yeah.
what needed or what I hoped or wanted to happen in the film. I think visually, I thought it was very well done for the most part. Um, so I like there were no real yeah, like set, ideas of what I thought people should look like or act like or how, mannerisms or anything like that. Um, I think where I stumbled a little, and I did know that there were reviews. Not so much reviews, but like I think I had heard like on the radio like the box office, opening was like much lower than hoped for and that kind of thing. So not necessarily from a review standpoint, but just like a general audience reception overall that it wasn't meeting some of those types of expectations, financially or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think where I would, and we'll probably get into this more on like later slides, where I would sort of go because I'm much less, perhaps a little bit more like Corey is. I'm much less prone to like the visual aspects, and Kat knows this because we talk about TV every week. Where like she's like, "Oh, I noticed this thing," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I guess that did happen, didn't it? I totally didn't even like pick that out because it's visual and not something someone said." Um, I'm more prone to like maybe think about how the ideas or some of the themes of it played out. But I think again we'll get into some of those in other parts of the discussion. So I don't necessarily want to jump ahead. Um, but yeah, no, I mean I like it is interesting because I always wonder how like with films like this. Um, I mean, I guess there must be a lot of people out there actually reading the reviews. I tend not to myself, or like I tend to, I tend to be very good at like ignoring the reviews if I really want to see the movie anyway.
Right.
And if I don't care about it, then I'm not going to read the reviews to begin with. But even like when they're saying, to pick a movie like Kat probably would never see, like, the next Thor movie or something. If everyone says it's terrible, I'm probably going to go see it anyway because it's a Marvel superhero movie and I see all of them. So as far as that goes, like I don't think that I had, that much expectation, but it is interesting to me to kind of think about how, given that this is such a well-beloved book, and it's a book that I've been meaning to read for the last 30 years, because like everyone else around me was reading it, as I grew up, and if it was assigned in school, like I missed that day or something, or if it was like it's totally the type of book I should have and would have read
Right.
had like it fallen into my hands when I was a kid, and I don't know why I never read it. I didn't, and so
Maybe it was banned at your library.
but being maybe, but like there were other books that I read anyway, so that didn't stop me. But yeah, no, just given how many people love the book and really love the story, it always surprises me when, it is a big budget film, but it's not like the biggest budget film, like, and the fact that it didn't kind of meet, uh, you know, even the amount, like I think it was like 20% short of like what they spent to even make the film, in the what it earned in the box office, and so like it just kind of surprises me that there weren't more people who are just like, who cares what the critics and reviewers are saying? I'm going to go see it anyway. I don't know.
I wonder if that's still true because it's still in theaters. So, and I feel like my impression is that there's a slight unfair narrative that's kind of built that because it wasn't number one or didn't maybe make quite as much money as they expected, that you kind of get the sense that it was a flop, and it wasn't. What's kind of ironically did it a disservice was I think Black Panther came out like a week or two before, and that just has dominated ever since. But the exciting thing about it is between the two of them, it's like the highest grossing like 6 or 7 weeks in a row with films by Black filmmakers, which has never happened before, making that much money. And I think, the media kind of spin on it has been, A Wrinkle in Time was disappointing. When it's really that Black Panther became this sort of juggernaut that has just been steamrolling. So it sort of depends on how you look at it, I guess.
No, and that's a fair point. And actually, the theater that I went to here, I wanted to go see Wrinkle in Time in the not the IMAX but the RPX, the Regal version of IMAX, right? And it wasn't there. It wasn't available. It was all Black Panther like showings and stuff. And so, I ended up going to see it in just sort of the standard theater, which is fine. But like, I've become so, I guess I've become a little too snooty as to my theater viewing habits. The standard theater viewing is not as good for me anymore. But not that I think that affected my enjoyment or whatever of the film, but I get what you're saying. I'll just say to your points, as of Wikipedia 20 minutes or so before this discussion, at least, it was only at like 80% of what it had grossed. But you're right. And I don't know that includes like worldwide, and obviously there will be additional sales when it comes out on video and that kind of thing. I don't mean to imply at all that it won't eventually like reach even that, or even that may or may not be a good measure of its worthiness as a film. Just stating that those are the types of things that I was aware of going into it, and it did surprise me a little bit that given its belovedness as a book, that maybe it didn't hit those goals, but those are all valid reasons, like that you pointed out. So,
Sparrow, yeah. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Can't hear you.
Why can't we hear Sparrow?
Well, that's her and her little people
Yeah.
work on that
Okay.
while we continue on.
What about surprises? Were there any completely surprising, good or bad, sorts of things that you guys saw or didn't see, I guess, in the film?
Charles Wallace being adopted
Mm.
was actually
Yeah.
like knocked me off my feet,
Hmm.
especially because they also didn't seem to, they like dropped that bomb on us and then didn't really do much with it, which
Yeah.
was strange to me. I thought, yeah, I'd be curious to kind of hear all of your thoughts about like what effect does that have on his character and on the story if he's not naturally the child of these two people. What was their motivation in making him adopted?
I don't know that I needed a motivation. I mean, what motivation does any family have for adopting a child? It could be their ideas about, they've had one natural child and they want to participate in nurturing the world. Those the motivations that anybody has for an adopted child.
Oh yeah, I should clarify. I meant the script writers.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Why would the script writers make him an adopted child?
I don't know. I don't want to be callous, but this film did sort of cover many current uh, sociological, ethnic embracing. So perhaps they thought, hey, this would be great to embrace more, Asian and, the adopted child, that kind of thing. The other thing may also have been a choice um, to to say that um, sort of have sort of a mystery of his parentage because he's a new exceptional type of human being. So that was my other thought, was maybe that's where they were going with that, like just having his parentage be a mystery so we wouldn't go, oh, two scientist parents are always going to have an exceptional child, that kind of thing. That's
Oh,
where I
and
saw that going.
interesting. I wonder if then maybe that would be a hook into a potential
That's
future movie. Maybe they've planted that theme here and they'll develop it in A Wind in the Door or something, which is very Charles Wallace focused.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I sort of
yeah.
thought it um, enhanced those themes at the end of the abandonment of the father a bit, or Meg's feelings of abandonment, and and her feeling on behalf of Charles Wallace of,
Mm,
he's the fact that they're not even sort of related by blood. It only sort of distances the father from Charles Wallace even more.
right.
So not only has he not seen him since he was a baby or a toddler, but he was adopted on top of that. And so I think that only kind of plays into her sort of fears about what kind of guy is dad turning out to be. And then her link with Charles Wallace being something, that can't just be by their blood relation. It has to be because of the time that they've spent together. Um, that was sort of, I felt like that's kind of the impression that they were, just kind of distancing the two of them that much more to make Meg's relationship with Charles that much more special and unique.
Right.
More primary.
I mean,
Sound check.
yeah, you're there.
There we
All
go.
right, there we go. And thank you
Good,
to
you're
my
back.
student who loaned me fresh earbuds that are functioning. Yay, thank you. Okay.
I don't want to get off on too huge of a tangent, but since we are talking about Charles Wallace, did anyone get the sense or the message from the film? I'm trying to remember. I think I did, that he is supposed to be some kind of new and improved version of human, which you get in the book. I'm trying to remember if that was part of the film. when Mrs. Whatsit is talking about him and how he's brilliant and things like that. Yes, Sparrow?
I have to say, I got that more from the movie.
Right.
That came through clearly in the movie. And having him adopted, I love the fact that he was diverse from other characters. I love your explanation of the no blood connection, but it made me have a Highlander flashback.
Right.
Mysterious adopted baby is not quite human.
Yeah. Well, Highlander.
Okay, I'm older than everyone else in the
No,
room.
I
Never
get,
mind.
I get it. I get
We're
it.
all
Okay,
nodding,
okay,
like
okay.
we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never.
Me neither.
What?
Highlander, there should have been only one. All right, next myth moot, we're watching Highlander at midnight or something.
Plan.
Oh.
Um, sort of on that theme, Julie asks, what do you make of the absence of the twins?
I think it would have confused the story. I just think it was a choice they had to make on a script writing, on a production, on a direction, on a story flow, because they feature they're significant in my opinion for the character development of the book. They are given some of the lines that foreshadow the happy medium. They are representing the kids in the family who are normal, who negotiate the world without these problems, without these hangups, these angst. So that works for the book, but I think to try to incorporate that in the film, it just simply would have made something that was on such a huge scope even more bogged down.
Yeah, they went the way of Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
But their vegetable garden made it in. Did you see that?
Yes.
In a very teeny postcard size version.
Right. And I mean, in all honesty, I did miss that voice, and I don't know if this is where I can insert this, but I really, really did appreciate the character of Meg. She wasn't my Meg, but she was a wonderful Meg. I was not disappointed. I was not regretting her choice of casting. I was not regretting how they wrote her. She was, bristly and prickly and unhappy in her own self, which is kind of what I was hoping to see. And it wasn't. Her acting was really subtle and really delicate, and so that was really nice to see. But one thing that I did miss was one of my favorite moments in the book, and I didn't put it up on the screen or give you the quote, but I would like to read it if I can. And this is when Mrs. Murray is talking to Meg and trying to comfort her. Um, she says, "You're much too straightforward to be able to pretend to be what you aren't," Mrs. Murray said. "I'm sorry, Meglet. Maybe if father were here, he could help you, but I don't think I can do anything till you've managed to plow through some more time. Then things will be easier for you. But that isn't much help right now, is it?" That so resonated with me, and that was one thing that I really missed. Um, is just the idea that sometimes coping with life takes time. You have to give yourself, you have to allow yourself time and maturing and just to get through it. And so, um, you know, that's one thing where some of the dialogue in the house at the beginning, everything was really had to be cut short. And so some of that interaction with the twins and things that they did in the home and just more displays of Meg's science and math abilities had to be cut out because that was where that was. But again, like the twins, it just would have bogged everything down. So they have to make choices. So that's okay.
Yeah. And I did miss the wonderful Mrs. Whatsit centaur.
Yeah.
Oh man, I would have, in any other context, I would have loved the visual that they went with, but because that centaur was standing in the wings and not getting to come out on stage made me so sad. Like that, yeah, that the copy of the book that I read as a child had that image on the cover.
Yeah.
It was a very surreal. No, it was actually a different cover than that one. Probably an earlier, like one in the 60s, I think. It was a pretty old.
The one I
Yeah.
can't find because I put it away somewhere because it's falling apart. I bought a new book.
Mine,
Not a new copy.
mine actually, yeah. Mine fell apart. The covers came off.
Yeah.
But yeah, the wingspan across the entire book, and just that, like, the gender bending from the Mrs. Whatsit to something, you know, like, oh, it's just
That amazing
delightful.
sculpted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, though, I'm glad they didn't go there because they also did not present the misses as the stars, you know, the celestial star beings, and it kind of like those images kind of go together. So just having them sort of have, you know, be roaming warriors of the light, you know, seeking out ways to battle, you know, the dark. Um, that made it okay for them to not actually choose the centaur form, because that to me would be exclusively as the almost sort of celestial angelic kind of specific form that both the misses and any of the other stars who had sacrificed themselves would take. So in a way it was kind of better that they didn't, in my opinion. So, and I love the
Right. I
lettuce
guess
wrap woman thing. It was fun. You know, again, hey, that was cool.
yeah, I kept the quote of on the slide of outwardly Mrs. Whatsit was no longer a Mrs. Whatsit, which is still true. It's just not at all what was in the book. And I guess you do get the impression that if they're going to have this beautiful planet with these sort of, you know, living flowers that run around, she transforms into something that's appropriate for the planet. So that, I guess that's sort of the, rather than kind of introduce this idea of these you know, stars as they used to be.
I thought it was interesting that they, speaking of the flowers, that they would have kind of stick with the flower motif, and instead of having the flowers be what preserves their breathing, it actually saves Calvin. So in a sense, you know, you kind of get the same function of the flowers, just a little more excitement involved. And they're
Right,
sentient.
turn it into an action scene rather than
Right.
something purely kind of conceptual, which is often what these blockbusters do.
Right.
And it makes it appropriate for the medium.
I
You
do
know,
want
if
to
we're going to be looking at a big screen, let's see it big.
And so since we're kind of talking about like and equal or not the same thing at all, one thing that did surprise me, made great sense, I loved it, was the visual. Here, Curtis, let me explain for you the visual representation of it, as opposed to the squishy human brain thing that always kind of bothered me even as a kid, because I'm like, okay, how does that thing survive? What is, you know, what's supporting it? You know, I'm like all sciencey about it. And what I
Face a
found
bow.
was, I don't know if you all, I'm hoping y'all picked it up, but Camazotz itself, while it wasn't a planet, and that's a whole other discussion we can start to have later, they chose to not make Camazotz an actual planet. It was this um, conglomeration of nerve cells, like neural brain cells. That's the visual, that's the structure that I got out of it. So in some ways I was much happier with their version of it, Camazotz, a brain, being this a massive, huge, ginormous neural network. I really thought that was a brilliant and effective choice. I really did.
Yeah,
Sharon,
Arthur Harris saying the same thing, that it looked like they were sitting inside neurons and brain cells. So sort of, again, taking something that's smaller and more conceptual in the book and thinking about how do we kind of blow this up for a big screen presentation.
So I thought that was a really excellent choice.
Sparrow, did you have something you were going to add to that?
I was going to say exactly what Arthur did, that the squishy brain thing is, vulnerable to swift kick from a combat boot.
Yeah.
But when you're inside it, you're trapped, which you are in the story. Wow.
Yeah, there were things like that where it felt like the movie actually improved on elements of the book. I remember another one was the way, or the explanation that they gave for how they ended up on Camazotz and why the misses couldn't accompany the children. In the book, it's much less scrutable. They sort of arrive there and they say, and of course, we're not actually going with you. And it's just like, oh, sure, right. Naturally, you're not going with us. And as a kid, you're reading it like, wait, why? Yeah, so
Gandalf,
I felt
why
like,
aren't you going with them? Gandalf, why are you leaving?
yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, oh, this is the point in the young adult hero's journey where you have to go on your own now, kids.
Yeah.
And no,
Even the
rereading
meta
it
comment was right there.
that stood out to me more clearly rereading it recently. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So can I bring it up? The Camazotz not being a planet. I mean, did you guys get that? That's what I got. That it wasn't actually a planet because they looked at the big black blotchy neuron blob and said that's Camazotz.
That's
It's
Amazon's,
dark.
yeah.
It's the dark. And then when they go there, I feel like there's this sentient tornado attack on that's manifested as if in reaction to their presence, followed by the iconic bouncy ball on the street thing, followed by the beach. And none of those, I made a point in my notes to say, no representation of a person or a human on Camazotz seemed to actually be a person or a human. So
Right.
it's like it wasn't a population, which completely shifts, of course, the discussion about all the, post the Soviet era, communism, all those kinds of issues. It kind of completely removes that. Also, nothing was gray. It was all highly colored because, of course, it's a movie. It's much more exciting. So I thought that actually was a choice that worked. It was very different, but it was a choice that worked. But I wonder, and that's why I asked if Curtis had read the book, I wonder if to audiences who had not read the book, to have a framework of expectation, and then to go, oh, it's the bouncy ball scene. Was that confusing? Did it work? I'm trying to put myself in the position of somebody who was not so familiar with the book. Would that make sense? I mean, there was almost the food trope, don't eat anything in fairy kind of thing, and not really quite sure how that was supposed to trap them or not. I mean, it delineated who, that Charles Wallace was in the know because he's super, and Calvin, of course, is wolfing down the stuff that is supposedly sand. But I just wondered how that whole progression worked for you guys, and to confirm my perception or my understanding that there weren't any actual other people on Camazotz. This is all manufactured by it. Does that sound right?
That entire choice reminded me so strongly of like movies like Inception, or particular portions of the series Fringe, where they go inside a person's mind, and everything that you meet there is some sort of a manifestation of an inner state of and I would agree with you, Sharon. I actually think that worked really well for the movie, particularly because this is a story that is about fighting this cosmic battle between light and dark, yet it's being fought almost in the micro scale in some sense,
Hey, like the brain is huge, the neurons are
Mhm.
massive, and you're micro. Visually, that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. And the way that it's fought isn't by armies and invasions, and it's overcoming through love. which is not a particularly embodied idea, much more of a mental or a, you know. So I thought that choice to go to an inner world rather than something more tangible really did work very well thematically.
Well, and it's true.
Go ahead.
Even oh, sorry, you finish, Sharon.
You go ahead. No, I'll take us off somewhere else. Go ahead.
I think that's true even outside of Camazotz. The Happy Medium's cave comes to mind with the balance beams, where the whole point of it is to find that equilibrium, and you know, and so not even just in Camazotz, but throughout the movie, I think you get sort of visual representations of the character's inner state, and how they navigate the world is reflective of where they are, I guess mostly Meg, but where she is in her journey of, you know, that kind of coming to her self-acceptance and everything. But it takes, you know, to not have Camazotz have taken over planets, but to be more of the darkness inside all of us. Turns it more into that inner space journey rather than the kind of more, I guess, Soviet paranoia that it evoked, where, you know, the civilizations are succumbing one by one, and Earth is under siege, but it hasn't given in yet, but, you know, it might. And
we will continue to fight.
Yeah.
And one thing that I really appreciated along those lines was, you know, the tangible representation of something like you were just saying, love, which is difficult and is not as favored. Obviously, it was a huge theme of this book. It might have hit people over the head. They were really, you know, reinforcing it. But you know, for kids, I think we have to remember this is a kids' film, and I think that was okay by me because that's what I wanted to see. From the paper, we call it a hexaflexagon. The little paper toy is a hexaflexagon. You know, as a representation of love and folding. What I adored and might have seemed subtle was that in the book you have Mrs. Murray, who always seems sort of very unflappable and very gracious and very, you know, and even when Mrs. Whatsit comes in the book, she kind of just goes along with it. In the book, my favorite quote there about how she comforts Meg, you don't have the same bristling as between Meg and Mrs. Murray as you kind of saw for a minute in the movie. Also between the two, the Mr. and Mrs. Murray, they kind of had a little moment there at the presentation at NASA where she's like, "Oh, honey," and he's just like, "Wow," you know. What I adored though was that in every instance where there was that kind of conflict, and even with Calvin, um, it was resolved. The tension didn't continue, and I really appreciated that as a choice because what we're demonstrating in this film is how love can reach across these little things so they don't become the big problems. And I did really appreciate those just subtle tangible moments of that. The only exception to that, of course, was how obnoxious Mrs. Whatsit was to Meg.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
That was not okay.
That was a very
That was a bad choice.
She was as much of a bully to
Yeah.
Meg as any of those girls now. I
Yeah.
sat there and I fought for a reason, and the only thing I can come up with is that perhaps she was being a mirror to Meg of Meg's own inner voice, her own inner criticism of herself, her own self-doubt, her own, you know, those kinds of things. And so that's the only thing I can give you, but I'm not giving it very generously because I really didn't like Reese Witherspoon, the
Me
choices
neither.
and the way she was Mrs. Whatsit, because I wanted to see Mrs. Whatsit. And Sparrow, if you'll note in my notes, I said I would much rather have seen Sparrow as Mrs. Whatsit.
Yes.
I would have had so much fun.
Whatsit. Glory in the nights, you know, that kind of the, you know, in the stormy nights. So yeah, so that was the only, I think, real jarring note in the representation, the tangible, the demonstration of what healthy love looks like among friends, among family, how you treat people, how you resolve those small conflicts before they explode into large ones, even if the person you're working with is a little bristly, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Um,
what that does, sorry, one more thing.
no, finish,
What that
please.
does, the other box I wanted ticked was that there would not be that gray area. It would be evil. It would be what we are fighting. It was the source of all conflict, and the humans, the human players, we can have compassion for, we can understand where they're coming from, we can understand how the shadow and evil is affecting them. But I didn't want to see any equivocation. It is evil and it must be defeated. And that was one of the messages that I hoped would be communicated, and I think it was. I'm done.
Arthur's not going to rest until I remind everyone to say the it, right?
All right.
Oh, the it.
In
Okay.
case I think you're all getting what we prefer, but that was another strange little,
Yeah.
that was one of those ones, the thought I had with the flying lettuce wrap and with things like the it was just certain things that I noticed and I thought, that's different. And it's like it took me a while to even figure out, do I like that or not? Do I dislike it? Why? Like, there's always those little seemingly arbitrary choices that take you a little while to sort of decide whether is it my own resistance because it's different, or is there something that a significance that they're missing by changing it. So, and at some
Well,
point, we're kind of talking about characters already. I do want to kind of switch to
Sorry.
our characters discussion because we're sort of there anyway. But
Yeah.
before we do that, though, can I bring up a few thoughts about what Sharon said, because she said a lot.
yeah.
Sorry.
So,
I tell
so
myself.
no, that's fine. And I don't necessarily disagree with any. I mean, far be it from me having only very recently. And sorry, my dog's being very loud at the moment. That's not me scratching myself. That's the dog. So one of the things that I think is lost by not having the same sort of big red brain thing. I mean, well, there's the whole like communist or anti-communist undertones of the story and all of that. But also, I think there's a bit of a disconnect then when you get to, and I'm going to see if I can go ahead a few slides here to like the red balls and the red eyes, and then you have the red brain, and there, I think with the imagery just in the book, you're getting more of the idea of there being the control and that. I mean, it's still pretty clear that the it is controlling things here. So I don't know that that's a huge loss, but just having that same color sort of running through a number of different things. And I've only read the book once, so I'd have to go back and see like how useful. Like I don't think it's the same level as like white and black in Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, where there's very clear symbolism tied to the colors and all of that. But I think there is sort of a softer thing going through the book of A Wrinkle in Time, where you get sort of the red, and it all gets tied to the it and sort of the evil thing going on there. I do like a good anti-communist tract as much as the next guy, but I'm okay with the sort of loss of that here. But I think one of the things that I did feel that it missed was an opportunity to talk about conformity and finding one's own uniqueness. That I think there was some setup for that type of discussion, especially when you get into like her neighbor, and I forget the girl's name,
I can't remember.
and yeah, and some of those you know, sort of interactions with the other children, and you even get like moments of like where everyone's bouncing the basketballs and Meg's sort of standing there like not, and you know, but like those are just like hints, and it never sort of comes to fruition. That I feel like, okay, we can leave the political communist side of things, but like maybe we could have still talked about sort of like individual uniqueness and, you know, being who you are and all of that a little more strongly than I think comes across. So I feel like there was a bit.
There
Sorry,
was
what?
that point, there was that point with Mrs. Witch, you know, bending down nose to Meg and telling her she's the only one in the universe like her. I mean, that's the
Sure.
individual thing. But yes, I take your point. They absolutely did take out the free will conformity uh, storyline from language.
And I don't want to make the point too strongly, because I think you're right. Like again, I think they set it up well. I guess I just would have liked to seen that a little more connected and I don't know, developed a little better.
Yeah, I would.
And
Oh,
go ahead.
oh, well, I was wondering. You know, it almost feels as though it's something that they kind of folded into the dough a bit more, rather than like deliberately addressing it as much. You know, because I think about even something like the change that they made with, so you know, casting Meg as a black girl and having the thing that Calvin comments on be her hair in its natural state. And so if you're, you know, if you're like a black woman viewer, you kind of immediately you've got this door that's opened to this entire this entire experience of, oh yeah, like the pressure or the standard of beauty is white woman's straight hair. And so the relationship to one's hair as a black woman is this incredibly fraught and difficult and emblematic thing. And the fact that they use that as kind of like the point of entry for her, or not the point of entry, but the talisman almost for her journey to self-acceptance. Um, that seems to kind of speak to that issue of conformity, and of the, there's something about the uniqueness of like the way that you are naturally, the way that your hair grows out of your head without you having to do anything to it is beautiful. That's the thing that's beautiful about you. And it kind of ties into, you know, she's being given her faults as her, you know, her faults as the thing that will enable her to be victorious. So in my mind, the theme is still there, but it's so much more unspoken and hidden
Yes.
than it was in the original book. But I thought it was brilliant the ways that they kind of that they did that. I thought that was delicious and wonderful.
And of course,
Maybe I'm too unsubtle. Maybe that's my problem.
Well, and I think it's not the Red Scare anymore. Communism is not the threat that it was to
Sure.
little kids who were doing deck and cover, you know, routines in school because the bomb was coming from you know the USSR, and so they've expanded as in a more delicate way, as Kay says, to encompass those ideas of conformity. And I thought it was very sensitive. I thought it was nicely done. I do admit that I did not pick up on the significance of her hair being the choice until I did read the reviews and hear the words of the producer director gal herself, and
Ava
read
DuVernay.
other people's take on that. And I do admit that that is something that sometimes I'm oblivious to. I'm a early childhood person, and so I was, you know, loving everybody. That's where I come from. But and I really I'm not as tuned into those things. So that was one thing I was very appreciative that I had read about, that I was aware of how profound that is for women of color.
Yeah.
That it's really
Yeah.
a profound, like you say, an entrance way to that acceptance of. I
Yeah.
love how you put it, Kate. How your hair grows out of your head is
Mhm.
perfect, and
Yeah.
that was really
Yeah.
a cool choice. So
Yeah.
Well, and it would have been a great, kind of message to send anyway. But what kind of gives me pleasure from it is that it's there in the book. They just sort of give a different spin on it. She mentions her hair.
yeah, she
Like
does.
that's mentioned
Right.
repeatedly throughout the series of her dislike of
That's
how
the
it's curly on one side and straight on the other, and it doesn't ever, whatever it's supposed to be, it does something else.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's, they would have been perfectly justified to introduce that theme, but they took something that was, her dissatisfaction with her appearance and in particular her hair, and then
Mhm.
developed it in a very specific way that means something to certain people or that are going to go see it, that they don't, this is a message they're not normally getting.
Yeah.
And of course, like, this was implied by everything that Kay was saying, but just to kind of say it out, of course, when she is confronted with her sort of double,
Mhm.
she has
Yep.
perfectly
Great.
straightened hair with
Yeah.
long extensions and, kind of like bringing home and then when Calvin compliments it, she doesn't even believe him at first. It's not till the end that she can kind of say thank you rather than say, oh, you're just saying that. So I also really thought that was a well done
Mhm.
decision.
Mhm.
What else do we have of questions from our audience, Kat?
Let me see. Well, let's maybe go to the characters, kind of more generally. I feel bad for calling out a negative comment. I don't mean to like single this person out. But Kristen says, how could they make the quirky characters so bland and ordinary? Um, do I would like to hear Kristen expand on that. Who in particular was bland, and I'm curious if folks on the panel agree with that. Certainly visually they're anything but bland, but maybe the performances are something different. A couple people spoke about um, Storm Reid as Meg, who I agree. For some reason, I had the impression that people weren't that enamored with her, and I thought she was fantastic.
Oh, I loved her. Oh my
Especially
gosh.
in some of those tough, dramatic scenes at the end. She really brought it, and I
Yeah.
was pretty happy with her performance.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
compare it to the little kid playing Charles Wallace. I admit, I had a problem with Charles Wallace, um, and he was, granted he's a little kid, but acting level wise, Storm Reid was, of course older, but she really did bring it. It was less. This is a child actor, um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and so I really appreciated the distinction there.
Yeah. I second
I'm
that.
going to heard that. I
Yeah.
thought that how Meg was written and Miss Reed's abilities were a perfect match.
Mhm. Mhm.
It can't be better. That is what Meg looks like from now on for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the skill and the subtlety and the, yeah.
Mhm.
The thing I most
One thing I really enjoyed. This isn't a change. This is something from the characters in the book that I thought they did really, really well. Which really struck me on these recent rereads was, and it's so radical for Lange writing in published in 1962. I think it was written even before that, but the kind of reversal of the gender roles of Meg and Calvin, I just find so
Mhm.
fascinating. So you have Meg, the protagonist, which is unusual enough, who's stubborn, angry, belligerent, good at
Mhm.
STEM, and
Mhm.
gets into fist fights. And whereas you have Calvin, and we can talk about his performance if he kind of sold it or not, but kind of the love interest, right? Good at English and, humanities subjects. He's a communicator and a diplomat. He's this sort of moral compass who keeps reminding her of the straight and narrow. Like, these are completely reversed from, I think, in my opinion, what we usually see. And I think, Meg's performance came across a little stronger. I would put Calvin in the slightly bland category in this movie myself, but I think they still got across the fact that he's taking on the softer sort of sidekick role.
And it's bland for him to point too.
Right.
Right.
I would say
Yeah.
so. I mean, even in the book, he has learned how to adapt. I mean, these are very typical female tropes. He has learned how to adapt at home, to please people, to not rock the boat. He loves his family in spite of their misgivings, or not misgivings, of their really lack of care of him. He reaches out to them in spite of the fact that they don't return his care and affection, but he's okay with that. All of these things are very typically ascribed to the female sidekick role, and and uh, as Kat was saying, sometimes, no, not sometimes, quite frequently, most of the time, the only reason to have the female love interest sidekick person there is to just
Yep.
be interesting and to be a way for the macho guy to be even more macho. And so to completely flip that, as L'Engle did when she wrote the book, and then them to be consistent with that here, where Calvin never overshadowed her as a character. I was okay with the guy's performance. I thought it was what it needed to be. I thought if it wasn't anything but um, sort of more in the shadows, then the subtleties of what Meg needed to show were not going to come through.
Yeah. I actually
May
preferred. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Kay, but I want to say one of the things that was important to L'Engle as she was writing and to us reading was all the images of holding hands. Meg, let's test her. Let's hold hands. Let's see if that works. And then Mrs. Which says, though we test her together, we each travel alone. And so to L'Engle, the hand holding was important, which we can read in some of her articles. And they did it right in the movie. They had lots of different hand holding, and the actor who played Calvin, it couldn't have worked without his really gentle, non-intrusive, of course we're about to hold hands because the scariest thing in the universe is here. Let's touch in. He did beautifully with that, and that was one of the very important things to me.
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually liked movie Calvin far more than I liked book Calvin. I always felt a little bit like I was letting myself down as a teenager, that I could never quite fall in love with Calvin O'Keefe. Like he never made it into my male literary harem. And when I recently reread the book aloud to my husband just a couple months ago, actually, I liked him even less.
Oh, wow.
I was just so aware of how often in the romantic scenes with Meg, he becomes possessive, or actually physically, like if you notice the number of times he grabs her elbow, or it says he shakes her, he's kind of strangely manhandling her. And that one interaction where he notices, oh, you have beautiful eyes, I don't want anyone else to ever see them, I don't want anyone else to know that you have beautiful eyes, which was just not romantic. And I loved how they changed all of that in the movie, that he just wasn't that type of a presence in Meg's space. I've noticed it's one of the troubles of rereading things that you loved when you were young, is having to sort of, go into this is the part of our show called I Love a Problematic Thing, But yeah, in my rereads of her books in these last couple of years, I just keep noticing how so many of the male love interests display those types of behaviors, sort of possessiveness and forcefulness, and it's kind of a shame, So I loved movie Calvin so much. Like I'll probably let him into the harem, but book Calvin still doesn't make it.
Well, not to, try to read Langle's mind. Maybe she liked that touch of, possessiveness on the part of a man, being wanted or desired in that way. And maybe she thought it was perfectly comfortable or reasonable, and maybe for that time, but it may not.
And maybe that had to do with the fact that he was 14 or 15 and not necessarily smooth.
Well,
If you this is your reaction and you don't know how to control it yet. Sorry, Curtis.
yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots of crit fic and external things we can point to too, but even just within the context of the story, his family is very physical, right? I mean, he's abused, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like so maybe there's an aspect. My dog has something to say. She's coming up here. Can't
Well, in the
stop.
book, he's neglected. I wouldn't say he's actually physically abused. He's more neglected. Book Calvin is more neglected as opposed to outright.
There's actually a scene. There's a scene where the happy medium shows Calvin's family in the book, and she's beating her children with a spoon.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, and not that doesn't mean you can't still dislike Book Calvin. I mean,
Sure.
that's certainly permissible. Oh my gosh! All right, shade. But yeah, I mean, that's just maybe there's not that it's necessarily a good thing, but maybe showing the distinction between what goes on at home and sort of how he then reacts to or shows his own sorts of affection and love. And again, not that that's good, it's just there's maybe a book explanation for that as well.
Yeah.
So I am wondering what your take on Charles Wallace was, how he was different from the book, and if you thought that was helpful or harmful to the story. I have my own opinion, but I've been talking a lot, so I want to hear what you guys think.
Well, I don't know. It's a tricky part, for any child actors. It's always a tough. That's a tough casting session, and it can be quite hit or miss. And I can see where, for example, the choice to veer away from book Charles's oddness of never talking until, outside the family, even as a 4, 5, 6 year old, I can see how it sort of maybe made sense on paper to kind of go the opposite way of say, well, in a way, he kind of does the opposite. Like in the middle of her gym class, he's, screaming things out for everyone to hear and everything. But I don't know, maybe that, to me, that almost kind of played up this precocious, yes, but is he really all that bizarre? Or, it took away something from the otherworldly quality and made him more into, I don't know, maybe a slightly more stereotypical, precocious, chatty, smart little kid. And maybe that was, I'm speculating that maybe that was the decision to sort of assist a young actor that might not have worked out quite the way that they thought it would.
Yeah, I wonder, Charles Wallace in the books always seemed to kind of fill the role of the holy fool character, the one that sort of on the outskirts of society and is kind of, patted on the head or indulged by most people, and yet is the one who's seeing things for what they really are. And his movie manifestation didn't quite hit those same notes at Cat. I think that was a really good way of phrasing it, that it kind of brings him within the realm of the canny, that we've, most of us have met very verbose young children. One of them lives with me. So it made it feel familiar rather than perhaps I'm in the presence of something numinous, this creature who somehow seems to know my thoughts or know that I'm going to be coming down for hot cocoa and a sandwich at night. And I did miss that. I'm certainly not at all involved in movie production, and so I don't really know or appreciate the difficulties of portraying something like that on the screen as opposed to in the written word. But there is a part of me that wonders, wouldn't just sort of like a staring small child be a sufficiently a sufficiently like uncanny, creepy kind of effect? But I don't know. It's not my area of expertise, so.
Oh, believe me, there's some creepy silent children out there who look at you right into you. They're out there.
And now that I think about it, that almost seems like the more obvious direction to go, because there's a lot of those in movies, right? Like there's creepy silent child trope. There's no shortage of it in horror movies. That's one thing that
Ooh,
You're like,
well done.
apparently it's one thing that kids are really good at portraying on screen, because we keep making those movies. So that it is, now that when you put it that way, it's sort of like, I wonder why they didn't go, Children of the Corn is maybe a bit of a stretch, but like more that kind of route of making him a bit uncanny, a bit scary, at least to the other school children, if not to Meg. Privately in their house, he's one thing, but rather than kind of make him just like any smart aleck little kid who's just a little bit too bright for his own age.
Sparrow, did you have something to say?
I was going to say one of the biggest differences with Charles Wallace, in the very last scene when Meg is bringing him back to the light. In the book, she says, "I love you." She is using her power of love to bring him back. In the movie, she was screaming, "You love me."
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Telling him who he was,
Mm-hmm.
his identity. So, yay, I love that. But telling him who he was, I don't know. I love the fact that, and she did in the end say, "And I love you," and that's how he got there. But the movement of that energy was not what I expected. It surprised me, and maybe it made her sound, and maybe this was the point, made her sound more plaintive. You are the one who loves me. You love me. I'm reminding you who you are. So, yeah.
Well, I think it.
And of course, I was crying. Right.
Right. Well, it speaks to that love is also restoring and reclaiming and being courageous enough, because again, here was her issues of self-love, that she's not worth being loved, that kind of thing. And her line was, "I love you even if you hurt me, and you love me," reminding him of who he was. That was her line. I wrote it down. And so I really appreciated that too, Sparrow. And that was a nuance to a difference between the two. But getting back to Charles Wallace, the word that is missing in how they chose to direct him was perception. He was perceptive. He was perceptive on all levels. He was perceptive socially, what would appear weird, and so don't do this, because he kind of had the twins' awareness of how to just get along. But he was himself with Meg and Mother, but he was perceptive, and that's where being able to be silent. He had wisdom, not just intelligence. That's what I want to say. Book Charles Wallace had perception and wisdom. Movie Charles Wallace had intelligence. I'm the precocious kid and I'm smart
Right.
and I can
Right.
understand things,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
not the wisdom of what to do with the things, which made his sacrifice in the book to try to stave off the power of it even more telling, because that was his pride, thinking he could handle it, he could do it, and yet he still fell. So that was kind of that's what I found most grating and unpleasant about the movie Charles Wallace. And I do admit that it did kind of it was something that was hard for me to try to put aside as I was trying to enjoy the movie. So unfortunately, I'm sure the little kid is really an awesome little guy, and he did a great job, I think, in how he was directed in the script and the choices that were made for him. So I'm not going to lay that at his little feet. So.
Yeah.
How about the Misses? I kind of like that title for them. I don't know about anybody else.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about the dissatisfaction with Mrs. Whatsit. How about Big Oprah, right? Like that cracked me up because they didn't
Yeah.
put that in any of the trailers.
Yeah.
And so I got in there, and then to see her be 50 feet tall, it just that sort of gave me a chuckle. I mean, of course they want to, maybe it's a visual way of communicating the stature that comes through with her sort of all capitalized double consonant words of her voice being bigger than anything else. So they kind of make her physically bigger. But you also just have to think that, like, of course they're going to make Oprah bigger, that like she's morally towers above anybody else. And this is sort of the role that she was destined to play. I feel like they were kind of having a little bit of fun with that, but
Yeah. Yeah. I found them delightful. I much as I would have really enjoyed to see them sort of embrace just older women who are allowed to not be like traditionally young and beautiful. I had a little trying to make my peace with that before I went to see the movie, thinking, okay, this is Hollywood. They always gravitate towards the visually beautiful. And so once I, kind of went within that, I did find them delightful. And I thought the over the top hairstyles and makeup and costume changes were so fun. Like, if you think of them as celestial beings who are putting on corporeal forms just for the heck of it, like they don't actually need these bodies necessarily, then why not do it with a little bit of flair and change into completely outlandish outfits every few minutes. So yeah, I thought that was really fun, and I thought the quote updates for Mrs. Who were genius. I mean, oh my goodness, that I started copying down, like they got Rumi, they got Outcast, they got Lin-Manuel Miranda, that is like, writers from like Lebanese, Nepali, Turkish backgrounds. And the Rumi quote especially, I thought could have been the theme of the movie and of the book. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Man, whoever came up with that quote for the script should be like promoted to something, because that was just superb. It couldn't have been, yeah, it couldn't have been better.
That's sort of another way of saying I give you your faults, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Kat, I was so excited that you invited me. Thank you. And I have to do the last 20 minutes of class to get people ready. Next week, we're reading the Lorax, so how exciting.
Boy.
Thank you all for talking with me and joining me. I'm sure you'll keep going and you will see me disappear from your airways.
Okay. Thank you,
We
Sparrow.
love you.
Bye.
You're the Mrs. Whatsit of our hearts.
You are.
Yeah. And now that you've pointed that out, I think that was a missed casting opportunity. They really should have
Yeah,
sent some casting scouts to New Hampshire.
yeah. Yeah.
I was less enamored of the quote updates, and not just because of Hamilton. No, I mean, again, only having read the book once, I feel like one of the things that I actually really liked about the quotes was that they all had, or at least most of them had, some sort of like historical significance. They weren't just like recent quotes in popular culture, and I feel like that's what they kind of ended up becoming for the most part in the film. And so there was a sort of the illusion of depth, or you know, if we want to go all Tolkienian on it. Also, just being in other languages and then giving the translations and that kind of thing in the book, which I admit would have been hard to sort of do in the film unless you were going to do like subtitles or something, which wouldn't have necessarily been great. But I really liked in the book how I don't know, you just felt like it was like quotes from all over in time and space and history, which kind of goes with the whole Tesseract idea and, you know, the folding of time and space into, you know, different things. So for me, the quotes worked less well. I'm not necessarily surprised that they updated the quotes. So, you know, I don't think I was like disappointed in it, but I don't know. I just felt like maybe doing more of a blend of some of like those older, more historical quotes, along with some of the maybe newer ones that are more crowd pleasers, would have been better served, in my opinion. It's just me.
I missed them too. And again, this was a childhood experience. When I read them, I felt so smart. You know what I mean? You're when you first encounter them and you see how you can apply, as Curtis was saying, historical. You know, the words from thousands of years ago can still resonate today. I appreciated that even as a kid. It was kind of eye opening. You know, it's not dry, dusty. The past. It was bringing history to now, and so I kind of missed that. I mean, I understand why they made the choices they did, and it's not a huge issue. And again, the translation would have been probably a problem, but I do kind of miss that feeling that I had when I read the book. So, but you know, not a big deal in my deal. I do wish. I mean, I know that Mrs. Who really does only express herself in quotes, but there were times when I thought in the film that I can't even remember the actress's name, but Mrs. Who was just sort of set dressing. I mean, she was just kind of there to say her line. There were a few times that she seemed to engage, you know, and you know, I don't know. I guess if I think about it, what else was she supposed to do? But she just kind of stood there and said her line when it was her cue, and then that was it.
The bestowing of the
So I don't know.
glasses.
Right, that's true. You know, there was that.
Yeah. Rumi, I also would posit, does give the effect of depth, because you've got like a 13th century Sufi mystic.
Right.
Sure.
You know, but I know what you mean, you know, for us especially, you know, my background, I was way more familiar with, you know, like Western civilization ancientness, not as much with any other part of the world. So I think that was one of the reasons I loved having quotes that weren't all like, you know, old white dudes whom I love, you know. But it was really cool to have sort of these additional voices thrown into the potpourri, you know.
I don't think any of the quotes were misplaced. I think they were all effective. And certainly,
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with any of those particular points. I think it's more the depth that I was thinking of, but I don't, more diversity of opinion and thought and, you know, experience is certainly a good thing as well. So maybe, yeah, I don't know. Again, like, I don't think it was bad or unexpected per se. It just would have liked to have that, more of that depth to some of the quotes if we could have kept some of that.
She probably had a lot more lines in the book too, in comparison to the number that she was given in the movie.
yeah, she interjected a little more frequently into the action and the direction, and
Yeah.
it seemed like her words did inspire or inform Meg specifically, even Charles Wallace, of course, too.
Yeah.
And I do have
Yeah,
to
I thought
admit,
this.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. No, finish what you're saying.
I was just going to say that I visually, Kay, you found the Mrs. very playful, very wonderful, marvelous. I did find particularly Oprah's appearance distracting. It was just a little more than I was willing to take. And if only because I started thinking, wow, that's a lot of glitter. How'd they get that on? Does she eat it? Does it get in her
Right,
eyes?
right.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that
Yeah.
that just kind of it
Yeah.
it interjected, and so it got in the way. And you know, and it made me think of other things and other people dressed up like that, and it took me off on a tangent. And so in a way I kind of felt it was not really Mrs. Witch. I felt it was Oprah in fancy dress. But if you know, Oprah's Oprah, I mean, in other films she has been in, she has been the manifestation of that character. She hasn't been Oprah. In this movie, she was Oprah. You know
I
what I mean?
wonder
But I
what it
don't know
would
if
have
she
been
couldn't
like.
have been Oprah.
Right. Well, no, see, that's what would have been great if they had. Oh, sorry.
No,
Sorry, I was
I just
cutting you
think
off.
of her in the color purple, and you know, some of these
Mm-hmm.
other roles that she's taken on. I can't remember the other one she was in. It was so. Anyway,
Selma, wasn't she in
yes,
Selma?
yeah.
And Beloved as well. Yeah.
That Beloved, that's the one I'm thinking of, Beloved. So I know that she has the chops to do that, but it just, I don't know, maybe those roles, just Mrs. Witch and Oprah, were so alike in themselves that it couldn't be anything else. But yeah, the glitter got to me. I have to admit, it got to me. And the end, oh, when Meg and the glitter is blowing off her eyes. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Nightmares. Uh, yeah, I wonder, wouldn't it have been wonderful if they had given themselves permission to drop beautification as the only lens through which we see the misses? And if they allowed them to sometimes appear as like unadorned women, that would have
Natural.
been awesome.
Natural.
Yeah.
Even if they'd sort of started as, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
mysterious crone who sort of blows in on the dark and stormy night, and then they're sort of revealed in
Yeah.
these other aspects, might have sort of got at that. People should look up this article in the LA Review of Books by Sarah Mesley, I think her name is, because she talks about some of these things that we're talking about. She mentions, she goes on for a bit about Meg's glasses and her hair and everything, and similar to what Sharon was saying about the kind of weight of history of Black cinema that Oprah brings with her. Of we've seen her as this representation of, you know, Black female suffering on screen for so many years now, and it's, you know, having her be this sort of the one to affirm Meg and her, you know, her identity and her self-worth is sort of, that's not lost on the people making this movie. And, you know, but then the article kind of finishes saying, like, you know, that's all well and good, but she has a great line about, might we not allow aging women to show the wrinkles of their own time? And so in using Mrs. Witch as this inspiring figure for Meg, you lose a little bit of something that was there in the book of what that character was able to represent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe they could have had both, you know, maybe it could have been you start with them one way and then you show them another way. It didn't have to be either or.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are we
Any
good
other
with the character?
characters that we didn't get to? We can
I could
Have we
go on
done 2
forever, so
slides?
I'm gonna
advance the slide number.
I mean, we've kind of gone back and forth on a number of these things. So
We just can't make fun of Corey anymore. That's the moral of this story.
no, but
No
see,
more
we're intentionally different from all the stuff that Corey does, because we don't care what slide we get through or how many there are or even what order we take them in. So
that's right.
that's intentional.
Apples and oranges.
Whatever you need to tell yourself.
One of the things, so we talked a little bit, so going back to the fact that like the book had this like anti-communist thing in there, one of the things that I sort of couldn't help but compare when I was reading that, and then noticing that like it's not in here, is just how much a product of the time it was in that respect with regard to all of the other science fiction being done. So of course I'm thinking of things like Robert Heinlein's The Puppet Masters, which is totally another, you know, anti-communist allegory of all the people, you know, being, you know, having like alien things on their back that makes them do all these like things the same and whatever. Or you know, films like the one with the pod people and the Day the Earth Stood Still and like all of these types of things. But then I was also trying to think of like there were other sort of fantasy and science fiction elements from other books too, that I felt like that book, I don't know if it was responding to them or if it was even, if L'Engle was even conscious of them when she was writing it or whatever. But one of the ones that struck me was similarities to Out of the Silent Planet, where you have this concept with A Wrinkle in Time, where you have the Earth that's sort of covered by this darkness and sort of out of touch with the greater universe and things going on around it. And that's sort of what the evil is, right? Is this idea that there's a darkness, you know, sort of keeping you from being in touch with the rest of creation or the universe or whatever. And I was trying to like, I mean, I don't think this has that same quality, but I would say like, in comparison with like the communism thing, which doesn't apply at all to the film, I do feel like you get that idea of like the out of touchness a bit, and sort of that idea of more through the science and stuff, I think, and I think this is true in the book too, that there's a way, whether maybe it's through the tesseracting or the tessering, I keep using the wrong verb there, the tessering, that there is this sort of connectivity, you know, to every part of the universe and everything in there, if you just sort of take the time to understand it. And I really, one of the things that I really was the visual of, you know, like the sand on the frequency tabletop thing, and it, showing just sort of like if you get the right frequency, it kind of makes this beautiful thing, and that sort of resonating with the idea of sort of being in tune and aligning yourself and being able to. Yes, Sharon, feel like I'm sort of fumbling through what I'm trying to say, so go ahead.
You're touching on a choice that they made, which I thought was very interesting, a change from the book to the film. The book, not only do we have the Soviet era, but we also have the space race era, because as you'll remember,
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Murray was with the team. It was his turn to try this tesseract, and it was a scientific, more experimental process that seemed very technical.
Mm.
In the film, the key mysterious essence that would make tessering work was this experience of love, which is what Dr. Murray saw when he looked at his wife cuddling Charles Wallace. His thing starts going. He says, "Hey, he's working," and he's gone on accident. Space
Yeah.
program trying to get to Mars.
Yeah.
So that was a significant change. And if you'll also remember, in the film, and this is reflected in the book as well, every time Meg, in her bristly, unhappy state, tessered, it was a struggle. It was that gray thing. It was hard on her. And then at the end, when she's embraced all the love and herself, and everything's happy dappy do, then her experience of tessering is this full, as you say, Curtis. It's no longer hindered. It's no longer under the shadow. It's no longer a struggle. She's fully. What do they use the word? I don't know. Anyway, she's fully into it and she experiences it fully. So again, we have the love element being the antithesis of the evil and the dark. That's limiting, as you would say, Curtis, the enshadowing. So that's kind of all played
Yeah.
out in the film.
Yeah, and the sort of repeated desire of Mr. Murray, I wanted to shake hands with the universe. Um, I loved that. I loved that conclusion. I wanted that. I wanted that, sort of like what Curtis is describing, to reach out and connect, to form that bond. And then the cycle that he comes around to is, I should have been holding yours. There was this opportunity for connection in his home, that he didn't actually have to travel anywhere to have it there with him. Yeah, that's
And that's
a
also
rather
modernizing of the role and the position of science way back in the 60s. Now we're looking at a response. We're trying to look at responsible approaches to science because we can do it. Should we do it? What are the implications of this? So it's become a little more metaphysical and philosophical, and because in the book it was still the space race, our heroes, the scientists, going where no one has gone before, and being, again, the whole setup with Mrs. Murray and Dr. Murray, the mother and father, was there was that sense that she knew he was on a mission. There was no mystery. She knew he was gone. She knew what was going on. She didn't articulate it to the kids, but it's like it's when your spouse goes to war, or when your spouse is doing their job, and so it was a different dynamic. But again, I think it touched more on it demonstrated what Curtis was expressing about the hindrance, the shadow between what we can achieve in the universe. Very nicely. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me, what kind of stands out most clearly about Langle's writing. In these books, that's different than anything else I can think of, is that particular blend of science fiction and fantasy elements with with the history and the philosophy and the religion. That she does it in a particular way, of communicating better than anybody the kind of connectedness and oneness of all things that, you know, this book sends them to outer space, and in the following book it's into the inner space of, and you get a sense that, spoiler alert, kind of like
then they all die.
But like to get into the next one, the sense of going inside is given the same grandiose sense of space as the space adventure. And then in subsequent series you start going backwards and forwards in time, and sort of, and like, not that nobody else plays with those elements, but her sort of philosophy in this series in particular seems to be about demonstrating that molecules and galaxies are essentially kind of the same thing. And, you know, that the exploration in both directions is a very similar journey, and kind of bringing in the ways in which philosophy can sort of, you know, or religion or history or whatever it is, can sort of speak to the spiritual aspects of that, but also not losing her joy in the physical science of it either. And I think, I don't know why I feel like I can't think of anybody else who puts it in quite that way.
Yeah, she's always, especially in the second book, she's always kind of repeating that mantra: size doesn't matter, when doesn't matter, where doesn't matter. You know, there's the things that you're grappling with are already with you and in you. So if you're going macro or if you're going micro, you're still on the hero's journey, you know. Which, yeah, I remember loving that as a kid. I thought,
mind stretching.
yeah.
Mind stretching. You felt like really, really cool. I mean, it was just fascinating. It was just a satisfying bite to it. You could really experience that. Yeah, I agree.
So, since the subject of sequels and further stories came up, I thought, as we come up on sort of the 2-hour mark here, and not that we have a hard stop necessarily if we wanted to keep going, but we have been criticized in the past about going too far past the allotted time. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up this sort of last slide that we have here from Miranda American, that I guess, I mean, these are things that would be lost on me not having read beyond the first book. And so I don't necessarily know, other than sort of my sense as a movie viewer, what might be setup or potential setup or a missed setup for future films. I don't even know at this point if they're planning on doing a sequel. I suppose some of that will be determined going back to the financial discussion we had earlier, although I could see them saying, well, heck, you know, maybe we'll try and do one anyway, like you know, even if it doesn't end up doing as well as one would hope. But anyway, so Kat, I think you had put together sort of some of these ideas about do we think maybe there will be more, or what are sort of the threads that could be pulled if there were additional stories to be told. So I don't have any particular thoughts on these, but do any of you? And what would you like to talk about?
The first one, you know, the omission of Sandy and Dennis. I actually, if I were a betting man, I would bet that any sequels they do would just completely omit Many Waters. Not just because they got rid of Sandy and Dennis, but actually because Many Waters is the one you would have the hardest time not touching on Bible and Christian stuff. And judging by how thoroughly they scrubbed this movie of any references to Christianity, I would guess that it would be very unlikely that they would attempt to cinematically depict an antediluvian world in which we're trying to figure out, you know, how we're going to survive the flood, and who, like, deep Bible geekery land, which I love, you know, but I can't see that one making it past the cutting floor.
Yeah, I was going to say, for anyone who hasn't read them, it takes place before the flood, so that gives you.
Yes. Yeah, and honestly, like, as a part of the time quartet, it's the one that is the misfit, really. You know, because the others have the same main characters, and then all of a sudden we're with Sandy and Dennis. So yeah, so it you know, from an editing perspective, it would be easy to cut that one. So yeah, that's my bet. I'm not actually betting any money on it, but you know, that's what I would guess.
On the slide, you point out that of course we had Principal Jenkins there, and so that, of course, he's a character in Wind in the Door. But what's missing was any visual of Calvin's mother, who features significantly in A Swiftly Tilting Planet. She was completely not there. And given the appearance of his father, I would say how his mother was beaten down. You know, she didn't have her dentures or teeth. You know, she was all kind of crummy and not the child that you saw, not the young girl that you saw in her youth. And, sorry, spoilers. Swiftly Tilting Planet. I'm not sure how that would. You know, obviously it's not impossible, but she was missing, so I'm not sure about that as a sign, you know, of there being future stories.
Right. On the flip side, if I was a betting person, I wonder if casting Andre Holland, who's a well-known actor as might have been paving the way for just maybe if we want to do a Wind in the Door, we could bring him back.
And I guess especially because that scene when they're doing the voiceover about the it and the effect that it has, and they go into that boardroom and everyone's like, yay, Mr. Jenkins, and you're seeing the jealous looks of the other teachers. And there's like, well, there's a whole story there that we never really get told anymore about in this movie. So I wonder if that's another, like, they're kind of hooking for the next one, you know.
Yeah, or at least leaving the possibility open.
Yeah.
It could be. I kind of, I mean, you point out that Calvin and Meg didn't kiss, or, you know, those kinds of things. I can see though where this movie could stand alone easily. I think it could go either way. So I guess that's my point.
Yeah, and I think Ava DuVernay's got some big movie lined up next. So I guess maybe if they perceive this as successful, she might move on to bigger and better things rather than sort of helming a new franchise. But I guess as with all these things, they want to see what the returns were. So you know, I feel like the sense of this one is it could kind of go either way. It was neither did it change, you know, box office history, nor did it completely flop. So I guess we'll see what they decide to do with it.
Yeah, does anybody know if they obtained rights to the whole franchise or just the one title?
I don't know that. That's a good question.
I would imagine Disney could get the rights if they really wanted them.
Yeah, not like the Tolkien estate, you know.
I mean, yeah, there may be other issues there, but I would be surprised if they didn't have plans to, you know, be able to expand, even if they never end up actually expanding.
Right.
That's just my cynical, you know.
They could own them and not necessarily choose to do anything with it.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I mean, unless there's any final thoughts, I mean, I think that was a pretty good discussion. Thank you.
I have one last quote that I thought was awesome that I wanted to share. It was by John Jennings, who's a professor of media and cultural studies at the University of California at Riverside. And it was actually about Black Panther, but the connection was through the critic Kiara Wardlow, who was saying that this is her quote, seeing an identity comparable to yours consistently depicted as a source of pain and angst also becomes tiring. And so in both Black Panther and in this film, you have what NPR critic was calling a world of unremarked upon diversity. So the way John Jennings put it was, the future for Black people in America was supposed to be connected to only 3 spaces. 1, the hold of a slave ship. 2, the plantation. And 3, the grave. The construction of a space of agency, joy, and true freedom has always been the central focus of Black speculative culture. I thought that was one of the ways in which this film excelled. It just landed us right in the middle of that, and it was beautiful to behold. I loved it.
Nice. And it pulls the movie and its source novel into Afrofuturism as a genre, right? Like it sort of
Right.
kind of puts it in a whole, without losing the original categories, it adds another category that it belongs to. And that's a pretty exciting thing.
Yeah. Stay tuned for a future symposium panel, we hope, on Afrofuturism.
Very cool. And on that note, stay tuned till March 3rd for our next movie club on Alien. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.